Okay,
You
good.
need to go.
Telling you what you can and can't do. It's telling you, did you do this? Did you do that? Or, do you have any financial
Right, y'all ready?
things in this thing or that?
All right, welcome everyone. This is Can They Do That? Real life scenarios ripped from the headlines and discussed through BC Code of Conduct lens. And we have some wonderful panelists here today. I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, but let me just first tell you who each of us are. My name is Rashee. I'm the General Counsel here. We've got Dave Rosenthal here first, the Senior Assistant Attorney General at OAG. We've got Matt Wilcoxson, the Deputy Inspector General of External Affairs at DCOIG, and Vanessa Natale, the Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel. So, questions for each of you in case you forget. Who are you? Tell us about your DC government experience, other relevant facts, possibly an interesting fact, and if you have a brief opening statement. I saw your face. Yeah, that's okay. And if not, you don't have to make it. Okay. You want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. Experience. I think this is year 11 in DC government. Do I need it? You think? Do I need the microphone? Is
Can
everybody?
you hear us or do you like us with the microphone?
I can hear.
Microphone might be good.
Okay.
Microphone.
Yeah, I think this is year 11. So I started at OAG with, no, Dave was already there. We look the same age, but we're not exactly the same. Dave was already there. Vanessa was my boss. We just become boss right after I had interviewed with her prior boss, who was then leaving. And that was 2013. So OAG, I went to the crime lab for some time and then found my way here. So I've been here since the beginning of the pandemic. So it's nice seeing people in person. So you're not just here up on Teams. The relevant facts, I think that's all of them. One interesting fact. Oh, I'll be teaching yoga this afternoon. So if you want to come back at 3:45, or if you're here at 3:45. And I guess you don't have to change. I brought clothes just in case, but we'll make it easy enough so you don't have to change if you're not in. And I don't have opening remarks. I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
I was going to start with her, but she didn't
No,
want to.
Dave, you're the wisest.
Hi, everybody. Dave Rosenthal with the Office of the Attorney General. I was a defense attorney for 10 years in the district, had 3 or 4 partners. After 10 years, I walked into what was then Corporation Counsel after my law firm broke up. And the guy who's then the head of juvenile section said, "What do you plan on doing?" And as a joke, I said, "I thought I'd become a prosecutor and work for you." And the guy actually arranged an interview for me that Friday. So I felt obligated to go.
Didn't realize you were soft-spoken.
Handing me a microphone is dangerous, she knows that.
You have to give it up at some point.
Okay, so I went in there and they offered me a job. I took it. Within a year, they made me assistant chief of juvenile. Within a year or 2, I was chief of juvenile, and I ran all juvenile prosecutions for 15 years, give or take, until about 2004, 2005, when I became a senior attorney in the Public Safety Division. I've been acting deputy, acting assistant deputy of the division, acting head of the criminal section, acting head of juvenile section. And by the time these late timers joined OAG, I was a senior attorney, sort of like where I could pretty much stick my nose into whatever case I wanted to and help out as I could. I'm now all policy. I write legislation, criminal rules. I'm the longest serving member of the DC Sentencing Commission. I was the longest member on criminal code, which some of you may remember. That's what Congress vetoed 2 years ago after 15 years worth of work. One interesting fact, after attending a bunch of my office trainings, Rashee talked me into doing stand-up comedy. Which she does much better than I do.
Morning, everyone. I'm Matt Wilcoxson, Deputy Inspector General for External Affairs with the DC OIG. And I've been with the district government and the OIG coming up on 10 years now. So time moves quickly. In terms of interesting facts, or at least relevant to this discussion, unlike my esteemed panel members, I'm not an attorney. But I love saying it depends when people ask me questions. So I feel like that kind of gets other than that, love to travel. I was telling Vanessa and Dave that with the pandas coming into DC, I've actually been to China where they have the sanctuaries and the pandas when they come back from the States. And I was real proud to see that the Bao Bao from National Zoo was there at the panda sanctuary. And even more importantly was that Bao Bao really didn't like the food and didn't like non-English commands. So it was a proud American moment for me. But other than that, just glad to be here and please are here to answer any questions you guys have.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This reminds me of when I was in 4th grade and I was the narrator in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. That's why the
Popcorn reading.
this is, and that's why I have the microphone. Hi, I'm Vanessa Natale. I just finished my 17th year in DC government. I started at OAG where I met some closest friends of my life, including Rashee, Dave. It's good to see some old faces and new here. I was at OAG for like 7 years, I think, and then a long 6 years at the Office of Administrative Hearings as the General Counsel. And now I'm proudly working for our mayor in the Executive Office of the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel. A relevant fact, I did inherit Rashee. Our former boss hired her, but I must say I've known her and I've enjoyed being her friend, and I've known her son since he was in utero. And so that's a good fact. And also that Brian Flowers is here. He's right there. He knows everything about DC government. I already have him doing legal research for me as we speak. And that's my brief opening statement. Nice to see everyone.
I know how I ended up with mine. Oh, there was one other thing that I could say before we start. My philosophy on ethics is even if you're an A ethics student, consider yourself a B+ ethics student. In other words, don't think you know it all, even if you got A's in law school. A good B+ student always knows that they don't know it all and to check it out. My number 2 rule on ethics is what I said to my 12-year-old son, which is don't do anything stupid. And if you're not sure if it's stupid, call me. And if you're embarrassed to call me, it's stupid. And that was something that he could relate to as a 12-year-old. And the reason I bring it up is because in a world of ethics, at least when I talk to people in OAG, I always tell them, if it's something job related and you go on your own, it's your own hindquarters blowing in the wind. But if we get a bunch of people from OAG and we sit down and we analyze the issue and we give you advice, not that you have to take the advice, but if you do it, at least even if you get it wrong, you'll know that there's a logic behind it and an argument so that it'd be less likely that the ethics people would go after you. As I like to say, even in a 6-3 Supreme Court decision, 3 judges get it wrong. Right? So it's possible to get an ethics issue wrong, but you don't want to go on your own on it. Speak to your agency counsel, speak to the ethics counsel, speak to these guys because they can give you advice.
That's pretty much how I start ethics training too. Like Ashley was saying, we're not trying to train our way out of a job. So the moral of the story is come ask. You can always come ask. We don't expect you to be ethics experts, even though I see 2 right in front of me, but we don't expect you to be. Always come ask, and it's confidential unless you make it not confidential. So we're not sharing. So, ready? All right. Bribes are out. Gratuities are in. All right, I hate to have to read, but I'm going to read a little bit for you. So Snyder versus United States. This is a case in which a former Indiana mayor who was in office when the city awarded contracts to a local garbage truck company. They also bought 5 garbage trucks for $1.1 million. The company subsequently paid the mayor $13,000 for consulting services. The mayor was then later convicted of accepting an illegal gratuity. The court held that the law distinguished between bribes, which are payments made or agreed to before an official action to influence the action, and gratuities, which are payments made after an official action as a reward or a thank you to the public officials. So the holding from this July was that federal law 18 USC section 666, you might have heard of this already, prohibits bribes to state and local officials, but it does not make it a crime for those officials to accept gratuities for their past acts. Knowing that, is this prohibited by local law? It still sounds bad. What do we think? Matt, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so, as it relates to the 666, the fraud of against program funds, certainly the Supreme Court has weighed in on that. One of the important things to remember, though, is 18 USC 201, which deals with bribery of public officials. And how the law is written currently is that it doesn't necessarily have to be just a federal employee. It can also be District of Columbia employees as well. So notwithstanding the 666 decision, certainly there are other things to consider in terms of both bribery and gratuities on the back end. And the question is, when does the money get involved and when does the official act happen? It's either beforehand or afterhand. And obviously the courts and attorneys will decide kind of what the fact pattern fits for those particular violations, but it's certainly something to consider. We're not able to walk around with impunity, for lack of a better term. There's still some very important and hard-hitting criminal violations that are out there to prohibit this sort of conduct. So.
The opinion itself had a line in there that although a gratuity offered and accepted after the fact may be unethical or illegal under other federal, state, or local laws, the gratuity itself does not violate Section 666. Dave?
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think of everything as a prosecutor. So, whatever 666 says about a gratuity, the question is it a gratuity for what you did last time, or is it a payment for what you're going to do next time? And so it may not be a gratuity in that situation for the mayor to have gotten, it may be a gratuity, I should say, for the mayor to have gotten paid something for a prior act. I can't believe that Congress would rewrite that because it just strikes me as so wrong that you could give a contract to somebody and get a gratuity, and that's ethical. But even if it is, as a prosecutor, I would be looking for what the guy does after he gets the gratuity, what's termed a gratuity, and see if it is actually a bribe for the next round of contracts or whatever else that executive or whoever it is doing.
So given what Matt said about 201, do you think that the prosecutor just chose the wrong thing to charge here?
My experience as a prosecutor is never make a judgment based on what's in the newspaper. I can't tell you how many cases I've been involved in where I come home and my wife said, "Oh, that's a really interesting case," but say it's a juvenile case was confidential.
The Monday morning
Yeah.
quarterback prosecutor.
Yeah, but my response is every article is 70% right. You just don't know which 70. So I don't know enough about the case. But if I was a prosecutor with a grand jury, I would be looking at what happened afterwards. So I don't know that they charged the wrong charge, but they might have focused on the wrong facts. Although it's, you can say that in hindsight, because until that case came down, they may have thought a gratuity was sufficient. But knowing that background, I'd be looking at what happened in the weeks and months after the gratuity was paid.
Vanessa, do you have a differing opinion? Like you think it's okay to take
Now,
bribes or accept gratuity?
I guess I just look at it like the term is gratuity. you know, as it being a former waitress, I was not a server. I was definitely a waitress. A gratuity is for like for doing something for someone, even if it's later, which is usually it is later. So I agree.
Okay. So at least in our jurisdiction, it still violates the gift rules. Our definition of gift includes at the very beginning, a gift means any gratuity, as well as all of these other things as well. So at least you're at least seeing you're going to be facing a civil penalty if you're accepting a gratuity. I would call us before you accept a gratuity. Like Dave said, if you feel embarrassed to call, it might. You know what? We're not going to judge. We'll still give you advice. I thought it was okay to have two jobs. So the former Baltimore City Health Commissioner now is the subject of a criminal investigation and may have violated city ethics laws when she was working for Chase Brexton while also a city employee. Chase Brexton has contracts with the city of Baltimore, more than one contract. Her city contract stated that she shall devote her entire professional time and effort to her service as Commissioner of Health, and she agrees that she will not engage in any outside paid or unpaid employment or undertake any other service except as may be approved and authorized in advance and in writing by the mayor. So, Vanessa, can you start us off? Have you seen employment contracts like this in DC government?
I don't think I've seen any employment contracts in DC government. I have to say, I don't, you know, the only contracts I see are usually for contractors or some other kind of outside service. So, and most leadership roles are accepted service or executive service. So I've not seen that. But based upon what that contract says, and we can all pretty much read that, no, you can't have that. Health commissioner cannot have two jobs. And the only way I would look at this is additionally is your interest, your conflict of interest and your professional duties as that role. So you cannot have another job, you know, that would take away from your interest as the health commissioner.
Yeah, I would also guess, and I don't know for sure, but I would think a cabinet level position is busy enough where I don't know that you would have time for a second job.
Agreed. And then they say, you know, professional time. I mean, I must agree, and all of us are professionals. You've thought about your work and are working while you're on your couch. That is still considered your professional time and your commitment to your public service.
Okay, now we have seen that some agencies have a policy or some kind of process for clearance for outside employment, and we don't. Our code of conduct doesn't specifically require that, but some agencies have put that in place. Dave, are you aware of anything like that at OAG?
Yeah, at OAG, we are supposed to go to our management, no matter what position you're in, and tell them you're looking for, that you're considering taking second employment so that somebody else can do an independent review of whether there's a likely conflict or not. I know at MPD, there's a whole process on how you can get a second job approved before you work, and it's problematic if you don't, because at MPD, you're a police officer all the time, right? Even when there is no real off duty. And so if you're working a second job at, you know, the MCI Center or whatever it's called these days, you know, that can be considered a violation if you're doing stuff. But like Vanessa said, even if you're permitted to do it, you can't do it while you're on the job, right? You can't use the phone, you can't use the printer, you can't use, you know, the internet to do things while you're supposed to be working at your position. I mean, you might be able to use your phone for a personal thing, you know, use your computer to look up, you know, what this, you know, which team won that day, but you're really not supposed to use the equipment for anything that benefits yourself as opposed to DC government.
Vanessa, is there anything like that at EOM that you're aware of?
I know for lawyers, we need to know, if you're doing something like that. But I really don't know. I mean, frankly, I think it's more of like an ethos. You're not supposed to have a job. I mean, I feel like I'm working for the district government and the mayor 24 hours a day. I mean, considering the responsibilities. So I've never seen any kind of written anything, but I do know if you want to do stuff for your family, which unfortunately we all get asked for all the time, I think that for the most part is okay, even if they're paying you for doing that. So I don't know of anything specific.
And you may want to check with your agency ethics counselor to see if there's.
In case it's hard to hear. Oh, that's fine. You may want to check with your agency ethics counselor to see if your agency has practice like that, in case you need to fill out some other paperwork. And if you already did reach out to BEGA and you got some kind of clearance, keep that. That's the best practice, to keep that advice. So if there's an issue later where somebody alleges that you're doing your other job while you're doing your DC government job, you have some advice showing that you got advice about it. Just because you got advice about it, I guess that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not doing it. So there may still be some investigation, but at least you have that clearance there. What do y'all think about financial disclosure statement filers? Is this, as far as you know, is this something that they have to report that you've seen?
This report is the outside job, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. The reporting requirements for finances depends on what your grade level is and or what your position entails. There are, I think, two different types of forms that are supposed to be filed or maybe required to be filed, depending on your grade and your workload. But that is the place where you need to disclose everything, even after you got an okay, or if you don't have to get okay, even after you've considered all the ethical issues, you better be putting down that money there, because that's where, again, DC government is able to take a second look at your income and say, wait a second. Now, I know in OAG, I always felt that was a little silly as a prosecutor. Like, I don't collect money from people who sell drugs of what they've been using. Like, I would have a conflict there. But still, if I was required to pay to file that year, I made sure that I filed everything I got.
You could write down independent pharmacist. Continue.
Then please.
Okay, right. Matt, question for you. What if I teach yoga and I do it during the day sometimes, when it's not too busy at work? And what if I just omit that from my financial disclosure statement? I don't think anyone needs to know. It's not that big a deal. I only make, $400 a year doing it. So can I just omit that, or is that a problem?
No, it's certainly a problem. And, when you sign your financial disclosure, you're doing it under the penalty of perjury. So if you're not forthright in that financial disclosure statement, that's one issue, probably indicative of a whole lot of other issues as well. That's always something to keep in mind. And anytime, you're being paid by the district to do a district function, for 40 hours a week. And anytime that you run afoul of that, there's going to be some issues, possibly terminally, but certainly ethically or otherwise.
Is this working? Can you hear it? Okay. Is that something that your office has prosecuted before?
Certainly have. And, generally speaking, it's someone's not been forthright on their financial disclosure statement, and they've gotten themselves into a lot of trouble with some other things as well. And so that just adds to a whole kind of bad pattern that prosecutors will look at.
Question?
Yes, I do have a question. So let's say, for an example, let's say an employee submits a financial disclosure, and on the day that they submit it, they quit their job. So they were working in outside employment, but the day that they submitted the statement, they quit their job. Is that something, when they submit it, BEGA flags it and investigates that, or you guys let that go?
So they quit
The
their
job, the
DC
day,
government job?
no,
or
their outside job, the day that they submitted their financial disclosure statement.
Well, your financial disclosure statement that you're filing is for the prior year. So if you're filing between April and May of 2024, you're filing
the
for
year
the
we are
work you had done in 2023. So even if you quit April 17th, 2024, you would have had to report for 2023. And then when you file for 2024, you'll still have to report for, so in April of 2025, when you're reporting on 2024, you would still have to report that January to April if you had made, say, over $200 of income.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. And I know this isn't incredibly tiny, so you don't have to read this or remember this, but this is our outside employment advice. And if you, outside employment is not prohibited. There are several different rules, or, you know, if you are able to follow particular guidelines, as we've talked about, not during your DC government hours, not ordering or requesting your subordinate employees to do your outside work for you, these types of things, not capitalizing on your DC government position, not divulging confidential, non-public information. Well, unfortunately for Dave, it can't be in violation of federal or district law either. So your independent pharmacy work.
Oh, that's good. I thought you were talking about my mental capacity.
Oh, no. But yeah, if you need outside employment advice, please just reach out to us, and we're always happy to talk through it with you. Let's move on to the Hatch Act. Okay, the Office of Special Counsel made a finding that the Secretary of the Navy violated the Hatch Act because he made statements in his official capacity advocating for and against the election of presidential candidates. So this is a direct quote. I'm not telling you to do this or directing any of this. Quote, and so I'm confident that the American people will step up to the plate in November and support President Biden for a second term as our commander-in-chief, so that we can continue our work together as free democratic countries, respect each other around the globe, end quote. Any problem y'all see with that? As far as political activity, what is political activity? It is any activity that's regulated by the district toward the success or failure of a political party, candidate for partisan political office, partisan political group, ballot initiative, or referendum. And it is not limited under this section here to activities regulated by the district when we're talking about on-duty time. So you can't, work on the presidential campaign or do any campaigning while you're on duty, while you're wearing a uniform, while you're in a district government vehicle on district government time. But what about, and this is for anyone, what about, let's say I live in Virginia. Can I do that?
I get totally confused about this. And can we talk about it? You mention it. Anytime you start talking about oh God, I'm just thinking about it or whatever, people are, it's a hatch, don't say anything. So I'm still kind of confused about all of this, right? So political activity is one thing, and then is the other, your capacity
On duty?
on duty. What does that mean?
Like while you're at work?
Is that so while I'm sitting at work or I'm before a meeting and we start talking about the election and who's running, we go back to just the basic, with the hatch.
Yeah. What, do you want to, how much are you able to talk about without getting in trouble?
Yes.
I guess as long as you're not trying to tell somebody how to, how to vote.
Yeah, I don't know. It just came up because I was looking at all this you know, the ethics rules yesterday, trying to prepare for this, which I'm so confused. And I was thinking about it because I was in a meeting the other day and we were just talking about something and people don't say, don't like, you know, and what I wasn't saying like I'm going to or whatever. We're just talking.
You should.
Yeah, right. It was more like just general, like talking. Or what do you think? Or are you nervous about one way or the other? So like that's the only thing, like, I know I'm kind of going off on what the thing, but I was just thinking it because I think we're all thinking that now.
Yeah, kind of
Can we
like
do
the
questions?
rule of like good cocktail party
Yeah,
conversation.
exactly.
Maybe
Can we
best
talk
to,
about that?
maybe best to avoid it while you're at work.
I was just going to say, I don't know how well you can hear me with this.
Can y'all hear? Okay.
Yeah, I think general political conversation is okay. So
Can you hear back there?
when we go to the definition, as long as it's not conversation about toward the success or failure of a partisan political candidate, but general political information, you know, facts, things like that are fine. But saying things like dump Trump or something like that, or, you know, when we fight, we win, or whatever, you know, specifically toward the success or the failure of a partisan political candidate, that's when we go into Hatch Act violation land.
And a couple of things. Your hypo was what was you're a Virginia resident. Because if you're a DC resident, it's clear. You can't be advocating for a political, and you use the right word, right? It's partisan, right? Because it's okay for you to do certain things if it's nonpartisan, right? You can run for the ANC or whatever. That's not a partisan thing. My understanding of the Hatch Act, though, is that it doesn't affect if you're not a DC resident and you're working for a candidate that's not a DC candidate. So if you're a Virginia or a Maryland resident, you can be involved in supporting your candidate as long as you don't do it on company time and use the company phone and,
That's right.
and you don't, try to, tell your people who report to you what they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And whether it's a criminal behavior or not, my recollection of the act is it used to be criminal and the city council, I won't say decriminalized it, but
I
took
did see
away.
that section was repealed.
Yeah, they repealed, I saw repealed and I couldn't find any place where they moved it. So I think they repealed it. So I think the penalties are civil, no longer criminal.
Now, one thing that Lynn reminded me in the back is that if you're around at 1:15, we have a whole session on the Hatch Act. So we can go through every scenario, every question, every answer for you. Yeah.
Actually, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is, I am an ANC commissioner.
Uh-huh.
Well, can I use my regular social media account that I do like ANC stuff on to also promote my candidacy during the re-election period? Or do I have to carry a separate social media account, X account? And also, my contact list that I would communicate with the constituents with, can I campaign through that list? Like, I have these emails that people that in my district, do I have to have a separate account, a separate list? Or can I take that list that already exists and say, hey, I'm running for re-election. You guys should vote for me again.
It's a good question. That might be a 1:15 question.
I don't know the answer to your question, and I've never researched ANC commissioners' roles. But a couple of things that, I was saying, don't do anything stupid, and if you're not sure, ask. I think that's a clear kind of question for that, because my gut would tell me, and I could be totally wrong, and that's why 1:15 is the place to ask it, is that if the list is a public list, and everybody can access it and everybody can use it, that's one thing. But if it's a list that only you have, I see that as a classic red flag.
Good to know.
Yeah. And if your social media is your personal social media or one that you've created for the ANC, that might make it.
It's my personal social media, But I also, like, if there's an ASC issue, like,
You'll
hey,
like
yeah, like,
amplify.
say like, oh,
ANC
there's a
issues with it.
meeting or there is something else that's going on, you know?
If it's your personal social media, I think that probably is okay. But I mean, you may want to reach out and just get advice as well,
Okay,
just for a little CYA. It never hurts.
okay, great.
So he has to make it apparent that it is your personal. Be very, very clear that this is your personal social media and you're talking in your personal capacity. Although ANC commissioners are not subject to the Hatch Act, you are subject to the rule on using government resources for political purposes or other outside purposes. And there is authority that states that an official social media account is a government resource. So you definitely want to make it apparent somewhere on there. Maybe you could post that this is my personal social media account rather than my official, but you just have to make sure that you make it apparent that you're talking in your personal capacity, not as an ANC commissioner, or that you're using your official ANC account. So we can talk about
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I would like to talk more about that. Thank you.
You've probably seen that on people's accounts and like the views held here are mine and mine alone, that type of thing.
Great, thank you.
One other thing, as long as we talk about social media, what came up at OAG in the last year or so is what happens if you start saying things on your social media account and it's tied to something you do at work. And we really spent a lot of time talking about the pitfalls of that, so much that on my Facebook, I took off that I work for OAG. I didn't want anybody to say anything that and I try not to get too political, but I didn't want anybody to say that was on even my personal account could be attributable to my office.
Now, one last question on this. For those of you, Vanessa and Dave, who work for elected officials, as you know, or you may know, elected officials aren't covered by the local Hatch Act. Is there any difference in how you advise people at your office based on that? Or how your office advises people? Have you seen anything different?
Well, clear, I don't know, right? Exactly, and that's okay, right? I think it is, because then I would probably call Rashee. So that's the part that still it's awkward, right? Because life is not in like black and white.
Yeah.
So I would call the expert if I'm advising someone who's my boss, I'm going to make sure I'm right. So it's not going to be like what I think, because most of the time that's probably going to be wrong. So with regard to this, so I would probably call Rashee.
And the other thing that, I'm a member of the OAG Attorneys Union. And I don't want to talk too much about union activities, but before each of the elections, our union invited the candidates down to speak who were running for the Attorney General to address the union membership, everybody who was not, who could join and who did join the union on what happened. And it was kept on that level of everybody gets an opportunity or was invited to speak, but not that we came out in favor of any particular candidate afterwards.
And would that have happened whether or not the candidate was an incumbent? Because I think this time it wasn't, so.
That's right. The last time around it wasn't. We had 3 people come up and address.
And so all were invited.
All were invited and all participated.
But moving on to Panda. Didn't even know all the Panda stuff before we got here. But there was a committee of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors who approved a resolution in July that would allow city departments, including the mayor's office, to solicit donations from private philanthropic groups to help fund the costly endeavor of hosting giant pandas from China at the San Francisco Zoo. The resolution was amended to specify what the money would go towards in covering the costs of raising pandas, as well as narrowing down the extent of city departments that can solicit private fundings. The San Francisco Board of Supervisors had initially voted to postpone consideration of a request from the city's mayor. Supervisors raised concerns about funding while the city was cutting millions from its budget, as well as concerns about fundraising from companies with city contracts. To raise money from private entities, the mayor, London Breed, must be granted an ethics waiver, an ethics rules waiver, since the city's behested payments ordinance prevents city officials from soliciting private donations. The ordinance is an ethic rule that restricts city officials from receiving private funding, which can influence their decision-making and cause corruption. So how are we going to make this about us? What if, we'll start with Vanessa. What if our mayor wanted to raise private funding to help return pandas to DC? And I swear we didn't know that they were actually on their way on a plane right now on their way back. What do you think?
Once again, I would call Rashee and then call Brian, then probably Erica. But the solicitation of donations or private funding is most likely prohibited. But we do accept donations. And so there is a specific process which my office handles, the looking at a donation and whether it is proper or not. And there's also another office that does that. So we're just different here in the district because we have the Smithsonian, so we don't have that. But there is a process for that. So that's what I would.
Matt or Dave, do you have any other opinions about this? Or pandas generally?
Well, it's okay. I looked up to see if we had ethics rules waivers. And if it is, it's deep buried, because I couldn't find anything that permitted in the District of Columbia for any organization to waive an ethics rule. So I don't think that occurs in DC. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Let's go to the boss.
So there is a process for a conflict of interest waiver. So the Ethics Act, of course, the conflict of interest statute prohibits employees from making any type of recommendation or decision that would financially benefit themselves or someone that's personally closely affiliated with them. So there is a waiver process, though, if the interest is in the district government and that the interest is so substantial for the district rather than the employee. The employee can submit a waiver to the board. They make their arguments and the board determines whether the district's interests outweigh the employee's interest, and they'll issue a waiver. But it's rare. I've only seen it done one time in 10 years. So.
And just one other point. I mean, I assume we're lawyers in here, not necessarily, but for lawyers, there's a whole code of professional responsibility, which is separate and apart from the BEGA stuff.
Right.
And which I couldn't find any. I looked there, couldn't find any waivers of our code of professional responsibility. So be aware that, there's the general ethics rules, but there's also lawyers, the code of professional responsibility you have to look out, and there may be some overlaps there.
Yeah. So I did find that the zoo attracts 2 million visitors annually, and I don't know if that's 2 million different people or 1 million tourists and then 1 million of the same parents who have toddlers who are bringing their kids back to the zoo, but 2 million people visit every year. So, okay, what about the DC One Fund? So we use that. What is the One Fund? DC One Fund program is the district government's workplace giving program run by the Office of the Secretary. The Office of the Secretary, in conjunction with agency coordinators, plans and administers the day-to-day operations of the One Fund program. You may have heard about it, but campaigns are going on currently. District government employees can manage their One Fund donations electronically. During the campaign season, it runs 10 weeks, roughly October through mid-December of each year. The One Fund originated to afford DC government employees a full opportunity to participate in charitable giving in their community. The DC government agrees that the One Fund shall be the only on-the-job charitable solicitation authorized among DC government employees. DC government seeks to achieve the objectives of an effective and efficient single campaign among DC government employees for the support of worthy charitable causes with minimal disruption to the workforce. So with that in mind, should we do a One Fund campaign for pandas? Dave looks like he wants to say
Well,
this.
The reason I'm saying that is when we were discussing the one fund, I started checking and I couldn't find online the codes for the individual stuff. I mean, they may be somewhere out there. So I don't know if there was a Panda fund, how I would even find the code for it. And what we were talking about earlier was, I think you have to actually look up the fund you want to give to see if they give you the one fund code. But if I was advising the Secretary of the District of Columbia, I would put, something with all the codes out there and everything else. So if the Pandas had a code, then I think it would be okay to do that, to donate through the one fund. It was set up, we did some research. It was first set up, goes back to the commissioners in 1955, because different organizations were coming in all the time and disrupting agencies, trying to get people to donate money. So they came up with this concept of a unified fund drive that would allow people to donate. And that way you wouldn't get annoyed all year long just for a couple of months.
There are specific prohibited fundraising practices, whether it's the one fund or whether it's, selling Girl Scout cookies at work, candy bars, Boy Scout stuff, any school fundraisers, solicitation of employees by their supervisors. As far as one fund, supervisor inquiries about whether you're participating in the one fund or not, setting any 100% participation goals, establishing a dollar amount or quota per person, compiling these lists of contributors and non-contributors to the one fund to, separate one from the other, other than for the one fund's use, providing or using those lists outside of the routine collection, and then using participation as any kind of factor in a performance evaluation is prohibited. Okay. Now on to the really fun stuff. Do ethics and Supreme Court justices mix? So in July, the president proposed reforms to the Supreme Court, including the adoption of an enforceable code of conduct. The proposed code would require that justices disclose gifts, prohibit political activity, and require recusal if they or their spouses have a financial or other conflict of interest. It says in there, Supreme Court justices should not be exempt from the enforceable code of conduct that applies to every other federal judge. So how come I have to follow the code of conduct but the Supreme Court doesn't? What would be potential consequences of a violation of a code of conduct for Supreme Court justices? Okay. Currently, it seems like nothing.
They could be impeached. That happens often, right? When I was thinking about this question, I'm thinking, well, Marbury versus Madison says that the Supreme Court gets to decide whether the Supreme Court comes under the ethic rules if it's imposed on them, which is sort of a catch-22 that I didn't like the answer to. There's been a lot going on in the Supreme Court in the last couple of decades that have annoyed a lot of people and have been bringing up these questions of ethics and whether people should be, whether the Supreme Court justices should be under the same ethics requirements that all other federal judges are under. Why is it that the Supreme Court doesn't do it when everybody else can? But I'm very cynical, to be quite honest, because the Supreme Court says guns are allowed in a lot of places, but they're not allowed in the Supreme Court. So I always wonder about how the Supreme Court views themselves and as opposed to how they view others.
Anyone else have any thoughts on this? Do you think a code of conduct would help regain public trust, change opinion?
As my mother would say, couldn't hurt.
Couldn't hurt. Right. Well, we are now at question time. So I'll bring this around if anyone has questions for our panel. Hypothetical ones are better than if you have real ethics advice issues. So you're making them non-confidential by speaking them out to everyone. That one? I'm coming.
So,
It's weird, right?
yeah.
It's okay.
My question is kind of timing. So let's say I help my husband with something for his job during my lunchtime. Would that still be a violation if I'm on company time, but I'm doing it on my phone during lunch? Is that an issue at all?
Like Matt likes to say, I guess it depends. If his work is any kind of conflict of interest with your work as well, I guess maybe some of it can even be where you're having lunch. If you're having lunch at the desk in the government building, which is technically a violation, but is it that big of a deal, a violation? Or have you stepped out, or you out for a walk and you're on your phone doing something outside of the building? So that's your time and your phone. It kind of depends on what his work says well. But if it's not, I mean, if it's completely unrelated to what you do, then I don't think, yeah, I don't see a huge issue. Do any of y'all see?
No, because it's not, you're doing it during a break that your organization recognizes, so it's not during company time. You're doing it on your own phone, so it's not, it's not using company equipment. And as long as you keep it to that, maybe it's a technical violation to do it in your office. But, during your break, I'm not sure how bad that is, but I guess it might be a technical violation.
Hi, everybody. I just keep chiming in because I'm an attorney here, by the way. I don't know if that became obvious. I just wanted to chime in on this one. I think I agree with Rashee and Dave. The one time, I think if it became a pattern and you were just, essentially doing things that made your husband money on your lunch and your breaks, that would become problematic for us, something that we would investigate if it was just a course of conduct and it happened all of the time. One time you were trying to help him out, he couldn't access PDF or something, and he needed you to update something, and he was running to a meeting or something. Venomous. And we came and talked to you, and you said that was the circumstance. I think that we would let that go. But again, as Dave said, I think it's a technical violation because the only thing you should be doing, including lunch and breaks, is district government work. Personal stuff like Facebook, Instagram, stuff like that, stuff that is not making you money or not making others money, is not considered outside activity, is fine on those breaks. So yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say, I think I agree with what has been said once. Not a big deal.
And outside activity includes like membership on boards and.
It does, yeah. The rule
Yeah,
is
that
meant to
counts as
capture
activity.
even stuff that you don't necessarily get paid for, right?
All right, I'm on my way.
No, take your time. I was wondering, I think everybody can hear me. I'm trained to project. On the issue of gratuity, I was wondering, how is that really different than a kickback? Because it sounds about the same to me. I just wonder if the panel had any input on that.
Is there a difference?
Okay, that's why I said originally, the focus needs to be on what the arrangement was. If I was running a grand jury, right, in DC, I can't do that because I work for OAG and not the US Attorney's Office. They, by law, they have all the felonies. But I would be particularly looking for a couple of things in that situation. And that is not only whether the money you're getting as a gratuity is really a bribe for the next act, but also whether there was a deal that was made and any evidence of a deal. So a kickback would be, I say to you, if you vote this way, or you do this as in your professional capacity as a DC employee, you get me a contract, you do whatever. If it's part of the deal, then that's a kickback and that's illegal, and there are a whole bunch of felony statutes that can go after you and that USAO can go after you. But a gratuity to me is something by its very nature, and if the term gratuity is not defined in the code, then you use Webster's or whatever the popular definitions are of the word, and you would look it up. Gratuity is something that nobody's under an obligation to do, right? It's a gift. So I would be focusing in on, was there a deal made before? And if there was, that's, that's crime. But apparently what went on in that jurisdiction was, or at least the jury or somebody found, no, they just said, here's 13 grand, thanks for the park.
Thank you.
Good question. A couple, actually. So if you have a question, should we go to our ethics officer first? Or we can come directly to you?
You can come directly to BEGA. You can do both. Either way.
And then my
Because your
second,
ethics counselor might say, hey, take that to BEGA.
okay, and then a second question, because I'm still a little fuzzy with gratuity and what's acceptable or not. I was in a situation where I did something for a patron and they wanted to give me a gift card. I said, no, I can't take it. So that sounds like to me, because I was doing my work and, maybe going above to get something special for a person. I feel that's something I should do. But I see the definition today is that it wasn't something I was expected. It came afterwards. So maybe it was okay, but it doesn't seem like it's okay. That's why it's fuzzy.
I think you were probably right in not accepting it, because if you had reached out to us and asked us, we probably would have recommended not accepting it. This maybe depends on the value of it.
Yeah, I think $10 or less is okay. But just generally, just your government employees shouldn't be accepting thank yous. What we were discussing here was essentially the Supreme Court saying that it's not a crime to get that thank you, but that's different than if it's a violation of the district's code of conduct, which it is.
What about something as simple as another and I will, redirect my ANC stuff to but what about something as simple as a commissioner, right? Sometimes you meet up with people and you're grabbing coffee and you're like, hey, they're at the counter first. You're like, hey, what do you have? And what's something as simple as just a cup of coffee? Because there's commissioners that say like, no, you can't do that. And other commissioners like, yeah, go ahead and get me a $2 cup of coffee.
Yeah, under $10 is
Yeah, anything under 10.
Except cash. Well, coffee is.
A coffee is okay. Yeah, okay, great. Good.
Accepting it. Yeah, you only want to do it once or twice, maybe. Yeah. And just generally be mindful of like when you're accepting these things, like of who you're talking to. Is this a developer? Is this somebody that wants something from you? And do other people, similarly situated people, get that same FaceTime with you? If they do they have to buy you a coffee? Like, just think about all those things. Generally, once or twice, just happenstance, those kinds of things are fine. So if it's under $10.
Right, we're running low on time, so closing thoughts from our panelists.
I'll start. Before I brought up like the code of professional responsibility for lawyers versus, just ethics for lawyers and non-lawyers. And when I think about the issues, I always think of, because I've actually had to defend people who were before bar counsel. And what I always think about in my own head is, what the hell would I say to the Court of Appeals if they asked me why I did that? And so that's sort of that first, don't do anything stupid, and if you're on short, check. Because if I would be embarrassed to try to defend myself or somebody else before the Court of Appeals, that's something I want to either get a committee up in my organization and or check with BEGA or bar counsel about before I advise anybody to make any move or before I do anything else myself. In other words, if it gives you that little heartburn, don't do it.
Yeah, pinch of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So if there's ever a question you have, be ethics or otherwise, you've got BEGA, you've got OIG, you can bring things to. It may not necessarily involve you, but it may be a coworker, a subordinate employee that's doing something that doesn't seem right. It could fall anywhere on the spectrum, be it ethical, regulatory, or criminal. But we're there to kind of help navigate those waters for you and take actions deemed appropriate. So.
I just say it's always good to ask, like my friends have said, and every time I call BEGA or Rashee or whatever, everybody, they're not looking at you like, oh my God, you're such an idiot. It's just, it's good to do. Just do that because you don't just work for yourself. You represent your colleagues, your office, your boss. So you want to do the right thing.
Okay, thanks, everyone. I'll try and hold the panelists around for a little bit. If you have questions, if not, I'm gonna offer them a kickback and take them to lunch for participating on the panel.
That's not ethical.
It's a very cheap lunch.
Yeah. They can get half of the sub from Subway. That's all we can afford.
Thanks, everybody. We're on lunch. Lunch is on your own. I left a little slip up at the front with suggested places that are within walking distance.